Hi, everybody. Welcome to the finale, to the final middle grade debut panel. This is the first of like the genre slash age groups that we're ending with, like the first fun finale one. So I'm extremely happy and excited to be here. If you don't know who I am, my name is Lily. I'm the moderator for this panel and like the face behind Utopia State of Mind. Next, we're going to have our authors introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump into the questions that I had immediately upon finishing. If anyone from the audience has any questions during the panel, please feel free to put them in the live chat, and I will keep an eye on that and sort of make sure that I'm looking at that. And now we'll have the authors introduce themselves, and we'll start with Sandy.
Thanks, Lily. Hi, I'm Sandy Grubb. I'm the author of this middle grade novel, Just Like Click. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I'm a former school teacher. I'm a mother of 3 sons who are married and have given me 5 grandchildren. One of my grandchildren has read my book 3 times already. Just Like Click is about an 11-year-old boy who lives in Central Oregon, has a great relationship with his great gramp, and together they created a comic book, Just Like Click. Sadly, great gramp passes away before the book begins. And soon after that, Nick's dad finds out he's probably losing his job and they'll have to move. And Nick wants to protect his home, so he steps off the comic book page and becomes his comic book hero and tries to save his dad's job and his home. But sadly, he has no superpowers, but the adventures begin.
Evian, do you want to introduce your book?
Sure. And when I saw Sandy hold up her book, I was thinking, oh man, I should run and grab the coffee of mine. But yes, I'm Avian Lee, and my book is called Pied. It's about a colorblind boy who discovers that he's a Pied Piper and can turn music into colorful magic. But it's the kind of magic that isn't accepted in the Piper community. So he has to deal with those kinds of things.
And my name is Christine Vernig, and I am the author of A Bite Above the Rest, which is about a kid who moves to a town that's Halloween every day. So people wear costumes every day. There are decorations out all year round. The town hall keeps vampire hours of all things. But pretty quick after moving there, my character begins to suspect that there might be more to the town than meets the eye, and that maybe the vampire mayor is an actual vampire and his werewolf teacher is an actual werewolf. And so he and his best friend Ty set out to investigate.
Perfect. So, of course, the first question I want to ask about being a debut as about the inspiration of your book. Can you all tell us about the inspiration of your book, and also, could you talk about how it may have changed during the drafting? You know, from the very first initial concept you had. Sandy, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I began writing Just Like Click probably 10 years ago. But at the same time I was writing this book, I was learning how to write a book. So I was taking workshops. I joined SCBWI. I joined a critique group, and I have fabulous writing partners who've helped so much to speak into my writing. I grabbed some things that I thought I wanted to live with in this writing process. I wanted to write a book that boys would enjoy reading because I have 3 sons, and after I finished the book, I became grandma to 3 grandsons, and then I grabbed Superman. He was my favorite superhero as a child, and so my protagonist Nick's favorite superhero is Superman. He has a close relationship with his grandfather, as I did. And then I just made it fast-paced, full of action. As a former school teacher, I really have always loved the idea of making kids into lifelong readers. And so I wanted it to be a book that kids would be happy to pick up, that they would finish, that it would inspire them to reach for the next book and keep reading. So it changed a lot. I rewrote the beginning many, many times. Even my main external goal of stopping the move wasn't even part of my story in early versions of it. But so it changed a lot as I changed as a writer.
Yeah, the inspiration for A Bite Above the Rest probably came to me actually when the main character just popped into my head one night as I was trying to fall asleep. And he was this 11-year-old walking around with a wooden stake in his back pocket because he was terrified that he was going to encounter a vampire or a werewolf or a witch at any moment. And I just immediately thought, okay, this is a cool character I want to write about. And then I realized that nobody around him was afraid. They were just all going about their day as though nothing weird was going on. And so I was immediately filled with questions about who was this kid, where was he, and why was nobody else afraid? And so A Bite Above the Rest was basically just my attempt to answer those questions. And mine also changed quite a bit from first draft to last draft. I edit quite a bit as I go along, but nonetheless, I cut a plot point that probably took about a fifth of my first draft. I cut the first 3 chapters, and probably one of the biggest things was at draft like 100. I switched it from third person to first person. So
Wow.
another big change.
Yeah.
So
That's a huge change, Christine. I'm kind of similar to Christine, where I was studying really hard in graduate school, and like whenever your mind, if anyone's ever had that really hard focus of one thing, of course your mind drifts to think about something else. So the idea popped in my head of this person who could only see in black and white, but one day they see something in color. And I just wondered, wow, how would that be if like you've never ever seen anything outside of black, white, and gray, and then suddenly you see red and you're kind of like, what in the world is that? So that's kind of how the idea just sprang into my head. But I had to, finish graduate school and do some other stuff, but it never left my brain. So years later, I decided I would try to write it. And I just wanted to get it out as ugly as it could possibly be. I gave myself permission for it to just be a pile of, dung on the ground, which is my book, just to get it out of my head. I was like, it can be bad. So for 1 month, I just finished it. And it was just a really elaborate outline with a lot of telling. And once I got like that beginning to end of, oh, this could possibly technically maybe sort of happen in each chapter, once I sort of got that done, then I went back, took some time and filled in each chapter with actual descriptions to see what could actually happen. So, my book has changed a lot because that first one was so bad. It was so bad. And, blessings to my best friends who read it because they didn't tell me it was bad. They were just like, yeah, these are some great ideas. It's so imaginative. Yeah, keep working on it. So, yep, I got into Pitch Wars back when it was still going on. And then I got into the Madeline Milburn Fellowship. Back when they were doing fellowships each year. And I got some D.B. Pitt, gave me a little bit of advice for it. So from those 3 things, I was able to kind of get it into a nice book form that an agent and editor both liked. And then more revisions once the editor picked it up. So gotta love writing and revisions if you write a book.
We love supportive friends who are supportive no matter what.
Yeah.
My next question has to do with the fact that Avian's book is not out yet, but it is out very soon. So you definitely can pre-order it. But I wanted to ask Sandy and Christine, what kind of advice or what advice would you give because your books have been out. And so what advice would you give post release, post debut, like having a little bit of time to kind of relax a little bit, sink into it? Christine, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice would be, as hard as it is to do, to try and let go of comparing yourself to other people, because there are so many people out there who are going to have, unfortunately, better sales than you and more good read reviews and a bigger launch party and all those big metrics. And I find that it can so easily make you really, really sad, and then it hits your creativity. And so I'd say, as much as possible during this process, and as your book comes out, and then the month or two after, to just kind of put your blinders on and just like focus on yourself and your writing and what makes you happy, and try just really hard to ignore all the rest of it. I think it'll make it a lot more of a easy, happy time.
Nice.
Yeah, I think my advice would be similar, to just really try and focus on the positive things that will happen, because you're just going to hear the most wonderful comments from friends who read it, from their kids who read it. I've had wonderful letters from kids who've read my book, and I just cherish those kid reviews and comments from my friends who love it. And then I would just encourage you to, just as far as promotion and launching it, just do the things that you love doing, and don't worry about doing everything that anybody could ever do to launch a book, but just do the part that you're good at and that you enjoy doing. It will be
Thank
enough.
you.
Yeah.
This is wonderful advice, and I gotta say, it's reinforcing what I was thinking, because I'm like detached from the internet. I was
Oh,
thinking,
great.
oh man, let me get off. I'm not on socials to begin with,
Yeah.
but our publishers force us to be on it. But the advice you're giving is really great, and I'm going to tell my publisher. My author friends told me I need to step back. So I'm actually doing a bit too much now. So
Okay.
got to tone it down, but I'm not doing anything, so I can't tone it down. Can't tone it down anymore.
Yeah.
But that is really good advice. I love, Sandy, what you said about the kid reviews,
Yeah.
because I just love the kid reviews so much. I've gotten 2 from friends' kids,
Yeah.
and it just feels so warm to get them, and I feel so good about it. That's why I'm like, let me keep those reviews to front of my mind and
Yeah.
ignore all the online reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my friends got a review from one of her coworkers' sons who read my book. He said he gives it 5 out of 5. And he says at the end, he said, the part that just made me laugh was Nick still had all that money under his bed. And it made me giggle to think that he thought that was the funniest thing. And I thought, that's just great. So they bring new perspectives to your writing that you never thought of before.
Yep. I'm being eaten alive by traditional reviewers? What are they called? Like the regular, not
Right.
eaten alive. That's a little harsh. It just feels like it. Just feels a little bit like they're stabbing my soul. But it's nice to get a separate issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I love specifically also about the middle grade sphere, the middle grade like area basically, are the like kid reviews. And I do think it's a little bit weird as well, especially for socials and promotions and whatever, because the target audience is much younger than, for example, adult books or YA books. So I do like asking this question specifically with middle grade, and but potentially people who are watching might be interested. And there are real differences to it being a different age group and a different kind of audience and what they're looking for as well. But there's nothing better than when a kid like gets the book, and it's so sweet that they will email or write and stuff like that afterwards.
Yeah, it's the best.
I want to know what the most challenging part of the publishing process has been, and what is the least challenging. And Avion, let's start with you, because you were talking about revising, and I feel like I may have detected a little bit of tone that maybe revising over and over and over again, it might not be the favorite part of the process.
Well, it's not so bad to revise. What kind of gets you is they want you to cut like 10,000, 20,000 words. So
Mm.
then you have to and they want you to cut, they'll just pick something. So then it's like, oh, no, 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 that cannot be cut.
Yeah.
What can be cut to get these 20,000 words gone? So that's kind of the part that I would really have to sit down and think about and really get concise with. I decided to go the route where I just wanted my prose to be more concise,
Mhm.
which I'm not that kind of writer. I have I love long sentences and lots of commas and semicolons. So I would just have to think like, oh, well, is this word really needed here? Is this other word really needed there for revising? And the other part of revising that I had to personally do a lot in my book is I had a lot of, because mine's magic heavy. So I had a lot of new phrases, new words, new phrases. So I had to reduce those a lot or think of another name for them that makes them obvious,
Mhm.
you know, like my previous word would be like, some spickle spockle. And they're like, what is this? We don't know. That's like a new definition. So I'd have to be, oh, it's red glue. Like just name the magic word, something that it specifically means. So that took some, but I still wanted it to sound fun. So that kind of took some getting used to. And I also had to combine some characters because they thought there's too many characters. So we need to condense these characters.
Mhm.
So that was like, it takes some brain power to think about for me.
Mhm.
But editing is way easier than writing the book initially. Like that 1 month of just like, what in the world is going to possibly happen was so hard. And just kind of like cutting 20,000 is way easier than that. So I'm game.
Well, I can still remember your farble and your koji. So those words, I'm glad they stayed. You had to have a couple magic words. I just loved
Ah,
your book. I love
yes. Oh, I love it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I think kids will enjoy
I
those
thought so
words.
hard about those words
Yeah.
too. Months of thinking about them. So I'm so happy you liked them. And I'm so happy they stayed too.
Yeah. They're in my brain now. But I'll go next. I kind of found all of it hard. I've found writing my book hard. Revising was probably a little easier for me than drafting, I would say. It's nice to have something to work with. And then just going on submission was hard. With finding an agent was hard. There's a lot of rejection that came during that period, 100 rejections. And I had one agent, and we worked together for a while, and then she changed agencies. We parted, and then I had to do it again.
Oh, that's
Kind of.
horrible.
But I love my agent now. And then you go on submission, and it's a lot of waiting for editors to respond, and so you have to teach yourself patience and work on the next book. Of course, they say just work on the next book, but and then launching your book is challenging. It's deciding how much to do on your social media or events.
I think
But
you did great on that part,
oh,
Sandy.
thank you. I did
Both
the
of
things
you.
that I like, so that went well. I would say if there was any easy part to it, nobody asked me to revise or cut something I didn't want to do. So if somebody gave me direction, my agent and then my editor, and said, "Why don't you we suggest you do this with your manuscript." I'm good at taking directions and following through, and that was probably the easiest thing.
Yeah, and I think my hardest thing was quite a bit like yours, Sandy. It was just the kind of the roller coaster ride that publishing is. You get those highs, you get your agent, and you sell your book and all that, and then you get the lows and just the stresses of all the numbers and will you sell another book, and it could just be a lot. And it was a lot harder than I thought it would be. And for me, the least challenging part is probably just the writing of the book, which is not to say that it was easy, because it's not, but I love that part. It's just so fun. I think maybe it's partly because I'm a pantser and I don't know what's going to happen until I get there. And so it's like, I'm discovering it as I go. So it's more not, it's not like it's not challenging. It's a fun challenge, I guess.
Yeah. I'm a pantser too. I try to be an outliner, but the outline's in my brain, not on paper.
I don't even have it in my brain.
Yeah.
I just want to also remind people, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We already have one, so I'm really excited to get to that at the end. I want to ask now about some questions that kind of talk about specific books. And the first is that I would love to talk about the parental expectations, which is a large theme in Just Like Click. And so I want to know from Sandy, how did you know you wanted to talk about this specific theme? And can you talk about how you approached it from Nick's perspective, since obviously Nick is the main character and the person that we're seeing the book through?
Yeah, thanks. As I said, when I was crafting this book, I was drawing things. What could I use to make a fun story that actually had some meaning to it too? And so I was considering different universal themes around family and friendships and finding who you are, your place in the world. And I kind of decided to tackle this parental expectations, hopefully lightly, because as a parent, I think most parents kind of struggle to find that balance between encouraging your children to try new things and persevere versus just being overbearing and forcing them to do something that really isn't who they are. And so I would say my husband and I did better than Nick's parents did. I hope my kids would agree with that. But one thing I thought my husband Jeff and I did well was allowing our kids to find and follow their own passions. And so I wanted Nick, in the end, to be able to find his passion, follow that, and be recognized by his parents for the talents that he really does have. And so I hope I pulled that off from Nick's point of view well. I wanted to show him frustrated at times, and he found some good friends with Celia and JC who could encourage him and Patrick, his other friend, who could encourage him in the talents that he really did have in his creative world. We have a neighbor down the street from us who read my book and told my husband, he goes, I think this book should be required reading for all parents. So he really resonated with just kind of that theme in there, talking to parents about how to help their kids find who they are.
Yeah, because what I loved about this theme, especially in your book as well, is that you have like these little, you have larger ways that they kind of discuss the expectations, and also smaller, more subtle ways. I think that really sort of progress the conversation about the themes and like the expectations, and the ways it kind of permeates sort of the way that you are approaching like children and also just people around you, I guess.
Thank you, Lily. Yeah, I would hope when a kid walks away, he won't say, this was a book about parental expectations. It was just woven in there subtly, but definitely it's there. Yeah.
Next, I want to talk about Pied, because it has a lot of music, and I could not help thinking, like humming when I was reading it. And I couldn't help thinking about what music I would listen to, or like what music, might be around in the world. And so I would love to know if you listen to music when you write, and if so, like, what kind of music you like to listen to when you write. And also just in general, the musical trials as well, which I found really, really fun to kind of read. And I was trying to figure out like how do I say this without like kind of, I don't know always like what to say that might be a spoiler, but like how one problem solved the trials.
Yeah. Yep. Yes. Yeah. Music everywhere. Right. First I want to comment on Sandy said about like giving the parents a little something along with the kids a little something. I think that's so important, especially if you're a parent that reads to your kid, like reads a story to them. It's always nice to have something to be like, oh, this feels like it's kind of for me. I love it, you know. And the kid, it might go over their head,
Yeah.
maybe. So I love that. I tried to do that too, but I love it when books do that. And with the music and magic part, I so my writing style, I definitely can use music to get in the mood, but I am not a music person, like with listening to it. Like some of my friends, they are really, really into it. They know every new song that's coming out. I am not that way. I get all my music from bookstores when I go there and they play something and I'm like, oh, I really like that. And then I ask them what that song is so that I can buy it, or soundtracks on movies.
Mhm.
And then what I randomly come across from someone who might give something to me as a recommendation. And if I catch something that I feel like, oh, this feels like the mood of such and such, then I'll kind of play it to get me in the mood. But when I actually write, I'm one of those people who just likes no music, no nothing, no lights. I like dark. Sometimes I put a hoodie over. I just like that, just nothing's around to fully focus. And then later, if I'm not focused, then I might go back and like try to get into kind of the mood again. But once I'm in that zone, it's just a gorgeous place to be. And for the musical trials and all the music in it, I was in the band when I was younger. So I played percussion all throughout middle school and 2 years of high school. So that was really, really fun. I was in the marching band and the symphonic band. However, I feel like I have forgotten almost everything about being in the band, because it's years and years later. So I'm sitting here trying to figure out what's the best way to describe music. And one of the things I wanted to use in the book was when I was initially writing it, I have each type of piper. So there's 7 types, has a color attached to them, and they also can have a type of music attached to them. So the music that comes out can come out with each color, and that gets my main character Rem into issues with each trial because I wanted to make it difficult for him. So there's certain things he can and cannot do in each trial that's based on the music and based on the color that the music could represent. But previously, I had one note for one color. My editor thought this was too complicated. I was like, okay, there's 7 notes, on a piano. Like there's 7 notes. Then you go up the scale, but it's just going up octaves. And there's 7 colors on the rainbow. And I have 7. There were like 7 animal groups, including plants. That was my 7. So I was like, 7, 7, 7. I'm gonna put it all together. I'm gonna weave it. It's gonna be great. And I gave it to my agent, and she was like, I think it's too complicated. We gotta change it up a little bit. So I had to change it a little. So I removed some things, but kept other things. But the most difficult part was, and this my Pitch Wars mentor helped me so much on, was what does the music sound like? How does it make them feel? Not necessarily what notes they're playing, but like, does it sound like birds fluttering? Does it sound like, something along those lines? So I tried to think in those regards and to read other books that were music heavy to see how they described music. I feel like I have a long way to go on that, but it's definitely better than it was previously.
Yeah, I think you did a great job because that's kind of why I was thinking about it, because I didn't fully kind of realize it till you were speaking, but about like the ways that the book is lyrical in ways that aren't just about music, right? And like the way we're talking about fluttering, right? For example,
Right.
and how manage all the language of music within just normal language too? Do you know?
Oh, awesome. I love that. Thank you so much. That makes me so
Yeah.
happy. Yes, it was actively trying to figure that out. So it should be like all sounds can be music and can produce magic. So if they give me a book too, I would love to expand on that. But I really wanted to really introduce it in this story, but still make it a full story with the ending.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm in support.
I think it would be a spectacular movie, with the sounds and the colors and the magic and the animals, and it would be
So
fabulous.
colorful.
Sensation, yeah, for the senses.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, from your lips to the Lord's ears, right?
Yes, there you go.
If that could happen, I'd be like, oh my gosh, that would be wonderful. But it was really something I was thinking of, like for kids, trying to make it really bright, really
Yeah.
colorful, really like animal based. I made a conscious effort to make this about not fantasy animals. And I did have some fantasy animals in earlier drafts.
Mhm.
But then as I was editing it out, I thought, okay, let me make these about real animals. So you got raccoons, birds, deer, and like pull the magic out of them because I thought kids see those every day and they could kind of think about like, oh, this what kind of magic would control these animals? What would they respond to? So I'm so glad that you said that, Sandy.
Okay.
I was hoping that it could be like really big and bright and
Yeah,
colorful. So that makes me so happy.
it is.
I now want to ask about belief and whether or not there are actually vampires in A Bite Above the Rest. Because I'm obviously not necessarily the target age audience for this book, but even I've met, many, many times there's this very conscious kind of playing with the idea of like, is it not? Are there too many coincidences? Is it a coincidence at all?
Mhm.
And so I'd love to know from you what drew you to kind of this towing of the line, right, between the belief in the supernatural and whether they are actually supernatural entities, and like this potential unreliability to the things. And how do you think that you use this theme in relation to the overall plot?
Yeah, so I always struggle answering questions like this because, like, really smart questions that talk about like theme and things like that, because I think it gives me way too much credit as a writer. Because when I start, like, I don't have any themes in mind, I don't have any messages. Like, I literally just start writing. I just try and write the funnest book that I can. And so like when I think about belief, like I didn't know what would happen until I probably didn't know if Caleb's suspicions about his town would end up being correct or not until I was about halfway through writing it.
Mhm.
And that is when I found out the truth. And so like whenever people ask me about themes or did you intentionally do this, I'm always like, no, like I didn't at all. And so yeah, I don't even have an answer. It's just I just had fun with it. I just had fun and kept keeping myself on my toes, I guess, as far as is this real or not? I don't know. And then I just kind of kept figuring it out. The worst answer ever. I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's so fascinating. You said in your process that you knew about like 50% through. When you were revising it or editing or when you got feedback, did you have to go back in and kind of start figuring out, okay, now that I know, I need to either throw in red herrings or I need to, you know what I mean? Like, did you have to? Okay.
Nope. The main things that I had to add in was I'm not very good at adding in the emotions of the characters. So that is the main stuff that, like, as I keep writing, my editor or my agent will tell me to put more emotion in there. So that's
I'm the same.
Me too.
Yeah. I'm just like, what's the person reading it feeling? That's the emotion.
Yeah,
right.
I want to write it in.
my critique group always encouraged me to put more emotion on the page.
Yeah, all the same.
Christine, did you have fun thinking up Caleb's non-costumes? I just laughed at those so
I
much.
did. Yeah. And,
They
and
were so fun.
I am so like Caleb too. Like I hate costumes because I just feel like, even like in theory, a costume is like a mask, right? And you can like hide behind it. But for some reason, I just feel like everyone is staring at me in a costume. So even when I was growing up, that was like my least favorite thing about Halloween. And so I love that the punny costumes. Like this year, I'm going to go to the I'm going to be a fork in the road. Like that's going to be
Yeah.
my costume at work. So yeah, it was fun to come up with them.
Yeah, they were clever. Very well done.
Oh my gosh, a fork in the road. I'm gonna steal that
Yeah.
because I'm a crossing guard and I was
Oh.
trying to think of what could be a good crossing guard.
Halloween costume.
Yes, Halloween costume.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also I'm not good at costumes and costumes ideas. So every time there'd be a different, like, non, all out costume in the story, I was like, yeah, probably would be something. If I thought of that, that would definitely be a costume that I would that I would use. The next question that I have is that I would love to ask, in Just Like Click, you were talking already about Nick's relationship with his great grandfather, and how important it is. And I would love for you to maybe expand upon the creation of this side character specifically as well, because he, for the most part, is like off page. So we don't necessarily see a lot of interactions necessarily with sort of him directly in terms of in the present, if my question makes any sense. So how you develop a character through other characters' perceptions and things like that.
Yeah. Well, it helped that Nick was still living in the same place where he spent a lot of time with his great grandp. And in fact, they still owned great grandpa's old house and they rented it out. And several of Celia and JC, who become main characters, sub characters, they are renting great grandpa's house. So Nick's in there. So every time Nick goes to the favorite bench where they sat, he can remember great grandpa saying something to him. Or when Nick goes to visit great grandpa's old friends and he's actually supporting them with money great grandpa left for them and leaving checks for them, and he reads to them or sweeps their porch, and he'll just remember what great grandpa would have done if he was there. He would have been bringing in a box of comic books and some chocolate ice cream. And so he doesn't ever really talk about great grandpa with his parents, but great grandpa is always on his mind. He hears great grandpa's voice. He sees the comics that they've created together. And then every chapter of Just Like Click begins with a comic book page like that.
I love that.
That Nick and great grandpa originally started. And in this, you have Click is the superhero, and Click's name comes from Clark Kent, Clark and Nick. So Clark and Nick is Click. And then the other main character in the comic is the inspector, and that really is great grandpa's persona in the comic book. So we learn more about great grandpa's kind of fatherly, loving input into Nick's life through those comic books. So I just kind of sprinkled great grandpa in as organically as I could without just spurting out and telling who he was. But, does that make sense? I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved how exactly what you were saying, right? How these memories and these places kind of immediately make you think of something else. It's not necessarily that it has to be, it's not necessarily a flashback for flashback's sake, but it's like you see something and you remember. So it's a memory, not like a, flashback in that sense.
And great grandpa's the one who believed in Nick more than anyone else in his life. And so that was a huge loss to lose that. But great grandpa had already invested so much in Nick's life that it was inside him and he could still keep pulling that out.
Avian, you've already talked so much about the world building, but I want to talk about it more because I love what you've said so far about like the linguistic choices, specifically in like magical linguistic choices, and like new words and everything like that. And since your world is so rich in terms of magic and the work you had to do to create these magical systems, how did you? Can you tell us about how you sort of decided, what details to put in where and how to introduce the readers and also the main character as well, but like how to introduce both to this magical world and when to like make certain reveals and when to introduce things because I love that as well.
Yes, that was a big, big, big back and forth with my with everybody. I think from every stage, everyone was like, when should we introduce these things to not overwhelm
Mhm.
people with it, the reader with it, but to also make them not be like, when is she gonna explain this? So it's like you gotta give them a hint and then give it to them, and then give them another something and then give that to them. But since it is so heavy world building, um, I have a prologue. So the prologue, and for all the writers out there, everyone tells you never, ever, 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 ever have a prologue. They won't read it; they'll just skip over it. So with that said, I have a prologue, and the prologue basically says these people are magical, you know. So in chapter 1, we don't find out until we get to the end of chapter 1 that something magical is about to happen. But in the prologue, I basically come right out with it. These people are, well, in the book, we differentiate the magical groups as pipers and people. So, and we call them persons if you're kind of referring to both. So, people are non magical and pipers are magical. And so you kind of get that in the prologue. So, these guys are pipers, they're magical. They do this super fun magical thing in a cafe at the beginning, and then jump, no more magic. So, that was hopefully a little taste for people reading that this was coming up. And it was also a way to introduce people versus pipers, because I feel like that's one of the things that can be confusing in the book. So that was introduced in the prologue. And then in chapter 1, it's initially like 1 or 2 things introduced each chapter. So in chapter 1, I think it was there's the countdown to the magic happening. Then in chapter 2, I think Farble might be chapter 2 and Kogi. Those were like in the first 3 chapters. So Farble and Kogi. So make sure they get a firm grip of these words and what they mean. And then moving on, another chapter introduction was this Pip2 statue that gets introduced. So it was kind of like no more than 1 or 2 a chapter, and then move on from there. It started getting difficult because once I got to my 7 types of pipers, I think I introduced what type the grandmother is, what type the uncle is, and then I left it alone at that because I thought that's enough. And then we went on and we get to this fun way they're going to travel to another place. And in that way that they travel, it just explodes. It's everywhere. But I don't explain it. It's just everywhere. So it's like, oh, wow, what's all this cool stuff happening? And then later, I think 2 chapters later, I sit down and I'm like, okay, I hope I've intrigued you enough to want to sit down and, turn on your brain and kind of remember these other phrases that you have to remember. So that was rewritten a lot, actually, because at first I just dumped it all in the first 3 chapters. And that's when my pitch wars mentor, my agent, my editor, all 3 of them were kind of like, let's try to see the best way to do this. I listened to a lot of authors too when they were explaining the best way to info dump basically without overwhelming the reader. And I know you probably, Christine, you probably had a lot too in your environment with what kids know, what kids don't know. So, like magical world, you kind of have to think about what you're introducing. And it's really fun to think about. And that's when you get a lot of eyes because you always need a fresh set of eyes. So it's like my editor will think, or let's say my pitch force mentor will think, okay, I think they get it. But then as soon as I got an editor, she was like, it's too much going on. The first chapters.
Mhm.
With her vantage point and their whole team at Madeline Melbourne read my book. Like a lot of people read it. So each new person that read it was like, maybe it's still a little too much. So kind of toned down until it got to the where it is now.
Yeah, that is actually the best segue to the next question for Christine, about the setting and the Halloween town, the Halloween vibes. I wanted to know kind of the inspiration for the Halloween town, and about the creating of the setting. And I kind of was also wondering if there was like internally a blueprint for the town and everything like that. So I just wanted to know all about that.
Yeah, so I came up with the idea for the Halloween town, at the very beginning when we first started talking, and I was saying that I was inspired when my character just popped into my head, and he was afraid and nobody else was afraid. And I came up with the idea of the Halloween town as kind of an explanation for why he was so afraid, but nobody else would be. And it just kind of made sense that if he was in an environment where everyone was dressing up, and a lot of them were dressing up as vampires or witches or werewolves, that the question could arise as to whether real vampires and witches and werewolves were hiding amongst the fakes. So that was kind of how that whole idea came to mind. And then I just created it by sort of throwing everything at it. I mean, I'd look up pictures of haunted houses and Halloween decorations, and I kind of mined my own, decades worth of Halloween experiences and just had a blast just throwing everything at that. And then I forget what was the last part of your question? I'm actually forgetting it now.
Oh, if you had like a blueprint of the town, you know what I mean? If you had a sort of, if you had to conceptualize, where things are, distances, etc.
I did make myself a map once I got far enough into it. And so I named like all my streets and my side streets, and, put Vampire Bats books here and the Banshee Bank there and everything.
Oh, I love it.
Like as Caleb and Ty were like running through the town, it all, if anybody ever bothered to pay attention and, to map it out, it would actually all fits together. So I did make a map, but I didn't make it until pretty far along. And then I did have to change some things and move some things because what I had in there really couldn't happen the way that I had written it to be. But
Christine, did you invent the notion that vampires will stop and count sand, or is that part of a bigger legend?
that is part of a bigger legend. So like the Count on Sesame Street, how the Count counts?
Oh,
That's
okay.
on vampire lore.
Yeah, that was clever. I thought to use that.
I want to go to one of the questions that we got from the chat earlier in the panel, but it's about advice. And so, what is the most, or is it? It's kind of about advice. What is the most valuable thing you learned in the writing process that you would pass on to a new middle grade author? So maybe someone who is either hasn't written, doesn't at various stages of the process. What thing have you learned which you would pass on to a new middle grade author?
You can go ahead. Maybe Sandy. Yeah.
Oh, I would just encourage people to just start writing, like Avian's messy first draft. I had a messy first draft. Most people do. Just kind of write and write. Don't worry too much at first about making it beautiful. Just get a story out there. But at the same time, keep learning about your craft, taking workshops. I love Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Writes a Novel and Lisa Cron's Story Genius. Those two books transformed my writing and helped me discover what story really is and how to pace it. So just learn and write. Do those things.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I mean, and then read, of course. So read in whatever.
Yeah,
way
yeah.
And then, yeah, and then along with what you're saying about like just putting it down, like don't be afraid to play around with it. Like how I was saying that it was like the 100th version when I switched it from third person to first person. And so like, don't be afraid to play around to see if something new or different might work better.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just the hardest part, if somebody has never written a book before, the hardest part is just getting from that first chapter to that last chapter. And that's why just get it out. And sometimes the beginning is so nice because you're in that mood. So you just kind of start writing and you get like, I don't know, you might get like 1,500 words, you might get like 15,000 words in. But then you hit that wall of, I don't know what happens next. And that's when you can just like say that happens at chapter 5, or it could happen at chapter 1. That's when I would just write chapter 2. Something happens, like this is literally what's in the book. Something happens that causes my character to be really sad. So then they go to the bank or something. And then the next chapter would be the bank.
Yeah.
And then I might like feel the bank a bit more. So I could kind of get into writing about that more, but then it'll happen again. Like, and if I didn't even know what happens at the bank, I'll be like, at the bank, he gets money. And then he's going to use this money to buy some candy. So then the next chapter will be the candy chapter. So it'll be like, oh, I'm going to describe a whole bunch of the candy in this chapter. And then he's going to get in trouble and the villain's coming here. But I might have had like this big idea of the villain, So like fully fledged, I know exactly how the villain comes in, how the villain leaves. So once I get to that villain chapter, it's like, oh, I can sink in and actually write some prose and make it really nice. And maybe this chapter will be like 20,000 words, which is way too long for one chapter, by the way. Middle grade, I had to stick to 1,500 to 4,000 maybe. I don't know, like 800 to 4,000. 4,000 is getting kind of long. But if one chapter is 20,000 words, go with it. Like if you're feeling something, just stick in that feeling. And once that feeling comes to an end, then it's like, okay, time to figure out what happens in other chapters. And you can literally just be like, something happens here. I don't know. And then go to the next chapter and like try to get it all out.
I think that's a great way to keep your story moving. And then you can go back and fill in the time at the bank and the time before.
Exactly. I'm currently doing this for my book too.
Okay.
I would have thought I'd be better at this by now. But now I'm like, I had a whole outline. I was like, I'm going to outline. It's going to be wonderful. And I did like 10 outlines. But as soon as I start writing, you hit a lot of just walls.
Yeah.
So many walls. And then now I see the plot holes because I know what happens later. So I'm like, this actually can't happen the way I want it to happen. So it's like, it was really constraining. So then I just went back to my whole, like, just do whatever and see what happens and later come back. My current process.
Well, that's also a good reason not to just polish what you've written in an early draft, because you might cut it out later. Although if you need to do that to procrastinate, I guess that's okay too.
If you need to do it to get into the mood, because sometimes I would reread something I loved that I previously wrote, and that might get me in the mood to move forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, no need to keep redoing like the opening chapters that everyone loves when the idea is fresh.
Yeah.
I would love to end this panel by asking you all what middle grade book you read as an adult that you wished that you could give to your middle grade self. Christine, do you want to start?
Sure. There are so many books that I would love to, but if you're going to limit me to one, I would probably say The Skeleton Flute by Tamara Allen. I thought that one has the message of like, be careful what you wish for. And I think my 8 to 12-year-old self could have really used that message.
I love that there are books so many books where kids can see themselves today. I went to a different school every year, first through seventh grade, and I would have loved to have more books then about how to start at a new school. But most recently, I just read the 10th Mistake of Hank Hooperman. It's a fabulous story. And it's got just a heartbreaking premise. Hank's just a kid and he's caring for his little sister. And growing up, my sister and I cared for our little brothers a lot. Maybe we not like, it wasn't like Hank's situation, but my parents worked and then they probably went out 5 nights a week. And my sister probably would say she raised all 3 of us. And I felt like I did a lot too, caring for my brothers, though of course I loved them. But it would have been nice to have Hank's story in mind and say, yeah, that's a lot for kids to take on and to handle, and then just have some acknowledgement, empathy, and compassion there. So.
Yeah, for me, I was a big reader as a kid. I read a lot of comic books and I read a lot of Sunday comics, which I guess are graphic novels for today.
Yeah.
But for the books that I would totally give myself would be Amari and the Night Brothers. I would just hand that right over to myself through the bookshelf, And I also love Nevermore. So those 2 book series, and they're like ongoing. I think they're going to be like pretty long once they get done with them. I would just be like, here's these 2 on top of what you're already reading. Go ahead and sink into them.
Yeah, I read Amari before, the first Amari before it came out, and I just loved it so much. I didn't stop recommending it to people after I finished reading it. It was so good.
Yeah.
Or it is so good.
Fun. Yeah. And I loved aliens, and I just loved secret stuff, like secret societies and aliens. And I was very tomboyish. So that would just be the book. I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is me literally. And my hair, Amari's hair looks like my hair. So I would just be like, wow, this is awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. I want to thank everyone for watching, and I want to thank all of our lovely panelists and authors. Please go pick up Sandy and Christine's book and pre-order. You still have time. Avian's book, which comes out on Tuesday, right? Like
Pied. Yep, it comes out on the 15th. So I guess that maybe not this. Wait, what's today?
A week from
I've lost all concept of dates.
Yeah. I think it is a Tuesday. Not this Tuesday, but maybe the next Tuesday.
Yeah.
But I'm not even sure. Actually, it's the 15th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it is October. That's all I actually know. I assumed it was a Tuesday, but I know it's the 15th. Because it's, I call it, New Book Day.
I trust you. So yeah, it's one of those days in October, mid-October, it'll be out. But and then it'll just be out. So whenever.
Exciting. Yeah.
Yes. And yes, thank you to everyone. In this descriptive box below are everyone's book links, so very easy for you all to find. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of the day, and enjoys the rest of fall and your reading year of 2024, I guess.
Thanks,
So,
Lily.
Yeah.
Much.
Thank you so much.